All right, guys, joining us today on the podcast, his name is Kyrin Down. Kyrin is your typical bloke who was following the standard path in life. This took him into the coalfields as a mining engineer, working a job that didn't inspire him. He eventually decided to take the plunge to quit his work and chase his passions. This ended up taking him through the intense deserts of Mexico, wild jungles of Colombia, and blinding lights of Japan. Nowadays, he's one half of the Mere Mortals podcast. Those same passions now make him strive for excellence in all of his varied pursuits. Calisthenics, learning languages, reading, meditation, deep breathing, lucid dreaming, philosophy, flexibility training, and the list goes on. Name an interest or activity, and he has probably attempted it. So with that, love to welcome in Kyrin Down. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Hey, thanks. No, honor.
So glad to have you here, Kyrin. And, Les has told us very small cliff notes about your life. And, it sounds like you're very well traveled and that you've dabbled in a lot of different things. And I'm sure it's been, a very interesting journey. So why don't you tell us about that? Feel free to go as far back as you can. We'd love to know your origin story, where you're from, and as much as we can about you.
Yeah, for sure. So, I find like the funny thing is I really don't like concentrating on myself too much. It's more on, ideas and other things. And that's sort of what almost prompted Mere Mortals, but it's getting a bit ahead of myself. So I will do the basic backstory. So yeah, from Brisbane, raised up in here, just, your average childhood, I suppose, had friends, had family, all the good stuff in life. I suppose one thing that was a little bit different for me was, when I sort of reached that age of puberty, 13-ish, I started to develop just a lot of anxiety, mostly due to social anxiety. So while I was comfortable around friends and family, if it was new situations or particularly around women and girls, I just shut down. I was a very shy kid. So that sort of like dominated, I guess, like that portion of my life. When I think of, sort of 13 to 21 to the end of uni, that's what I think of, that, I guess, like anxiety that I had in those times. There was good times and bad times, but that's sort of like the underlying theme, the tinge of that period. And so, just through I guess like a process of gradually facing my fears, I started to conquer those sort of anxieties. So particularly going out and meeting women, which was just, inconceivable for me at one stage. I gradually got better and better at that through practice and focus. And I think that one thing that taught me was really just, if you put a lot of energy and work into something, you can make, no matter what the situation, you can make it better. And I sort of used that, I guess, throughout my life. And then that started to influenced me with like what passions I had. So like I mentioned, I worked, I fell into engineering, I fell into working in the mines, and that was just because, I was sort of naturally good at mathematics and engineering. So it wasn't really a path. I didn't have this inspiration to be like, yes, I want to be an engineer, right? It's just, you follow your parents' advice. What are you going to do? Go to uni, I guess. Or what else are you going to do? Well, get a job, I guess. So I reached a point where I'd wanted to travel for a long time. That had been a long-term dream of mine, and decided to finally just like, okay, no, I need to work on myself. Like, I didn't exactly hate working in the mines as an engineer, but I wouldn't say, I loved it as well. It wasn't something that inspired me. So that took me on a journey throughout South America, Central America, North America, and came back here. And then it was like, okay, I've sort of learned the process of what it's like to follow your passions. So what else do I want to do now? And podcasting came up next for me. So my friend Juan and I would already discussed this while I was traveling. We were sort of doing like mini podcasts via Skype. And then it was like, come back here and it's just stuff it, let's dive in. And so that's I guess what we're trying to show as well on the podcast now, is pursuing all the things I'm passionate about. We talked about like learning Spanish just before, and that's what I sort of want to show, is you can get better at lots of things, and if you follow your passions, you'll be able to figure out the problems in your life, whether that be monetary or financial, with relationships, with body stuff, whatever it is, if you spend time, energy, effort, and concentration on it, you pretty much can improve whatever situation.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, there's a very, I guess, similar threads to what Shaun and I talk about quite often. And, I listed off quite a few of the things you've dabbled in and tried. So I'd love for you to, dive a little bit deeper and like tell the audience a little bit about, some examples of the things that you've, poured your heart and focus into and how that has developed for you,
Yeah. I think the best way of doing that would be examples of where I'm probably doing something that if you came across me in a certain time and place, you'd be like, what the hell is this guy doing? So while traveling, I had this routine in the mornings where I was very, very strict with myself. So when you meet most backpackers in hostels and whatnot, the general theme, the trend is they're there to explore, party, and somewhat like let loose from their normal life. But because I was going for such a long time, I ended up going for 14 months. I sort of needed that structure and that routine. So one thing you'd regularly come across is me in the, I don't know, like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. in different hostels, just in Guatemala, in Peru, in Colombia, just on like the top deck or in the basement or wherever I could find a tiny space that big enough to do some stretching. I would be there just stretching for 2 hours, 3 hours in the morning, listening to podcasts and working on my flexibility. Then after that, I'd be studying Spanish for an hour or two, just sitting down. And it's funny because it's such a social atmosphere in the hostels. That's what they're designed for. But then there's this random guy just in the corner doing his own thing, which has its benefits of being able to be super structured, being able to have a daily routine, which while you're traveling, it can get difficult if you don't have that. At least I know for myself, I need structure. I can't just go with the flow. And yeah, so there would be like moments like that. Then I'd also, if you came across me in the morning immediately after waking up, there'd sort of be like me sitting in my bed, just like either eyes open or eyes closed, doing 15 minutes, 20 minutes of meditation. So it's I guess like the process of creating structures in my life as well, to almost force myself to do these things, because there are days when it's like, I don't want to go exercise, I don't want to do that 15 minutes of meditation, but creating those structures has been very helpful for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you've cultivated discipline in yourself, right? And it's interesting to me, like, to find out from you, like, where that stems from and what made you become, so structured in, I guess, realizing that structure is going to help you and then sticking to it, because that's the part people have a lot of difficulty with, right? Is like getting the structure down and then actually doing it. And like you said, a lot of backpackers and travelers, they're there to let loose from their life, but it seems like you actually went away and started to become really disciplined and structured in an environment that, is the exact opposite of that. So could you talk a bit more about that and what discipline has done for you and where that came from?
Yeah. So two things with that. One is, I think, sort of preparation beforehand. So it's not like I just, flew into Chile, which was my first stop, into Santiago, and then immediately I had, 4 hours a day of super structure. No, of course it's, stems way further back than that. So before I started traveling, I was, doing lots of stretching and I was studying Spanish. So that, that sort of transitions over. So I've never been a fan of a big change in your life and just going after it really hard, i.e. New Year's resolution type things. For me, it's always been a sort of slow, steady, gradual increase of things. So another example of that would be, and these are the fun parts of traveling, right? So when you're in, third world countries, you can't drink the water in a lot of places without it being sanitized. And so every time that you're, unthinkingly in the shower at back home, just taking a drink of water from the shower, that's going to make you sick in some places. So in making discipline before going overseas and traveling, I forced myself to stop drinking from the shower. It's a simple thing, but you have to train that as well. It's not like you can just go do it. The other thing was one thing, and there's one thing I've been thinking about recently, right, is I find my brain is really good at making excuses, and it's much better at making excuses for not doing something than for actually doing something. And this is one thing when I had all those sort of social anxieties, I'd really get stuck in my head, and I'd sort of be thinking, I'd be on the bus to university, and like a cute girl would sit next to me, and just the small interactions, like she'd maybe brush your leg against yours, which is sort of an indication like, oh, maybe she wants to talk. Maybe, at least she's comfortable being close to me. But I'd get in my head and be like, oh, you should talk to her. But then the other sort of side of my head was, no, like, oh, she's, that was accidental. You're going to say something stupid. And then, everyone's going to look, everyone's going to notice, she's going to laugh at you, people are going to take photos, post you on the internet, like, oh, look at this creep trying to, talk to this girl, which obviously is insane. Like, you think about it, that's just crazy. So one thing I've actually started to do is I call it making myself dumb. I will purposefully use my rational brain to think, okay, I've been doing some research recently, and deep breathing, I think, has a lot of benefits to being able to sort of like control your immune system to a way, just oxygenate your blood. Like, it has carry-on effects, and it's also a type of mental focus. But one thing I started doing was I'd get bored in it, and I'd start experimenting. So I'd like, oh, maybe if I try hyperventilating, or maybe if I try, breathing through the nose and one side, and then I'd come up with all these reasons for like doing different things, which is taking me away from what I'm actually trying to be doing, which is, focusing on one set of standard breathing procedures. So one thing I try to do nowadays, which sort of ties in with discipline, is I'll set aside some time. So I'll say like next day, 10 a.m., I'm going to do this thing for half an hour. And then, when it's coming to like 9:50, 9:55, and those reasons in my head are starting to occur of why I shouldn't do something, that's when I don't know what it is. I can't really take credit for it, but it's almost like I just think to myself like, nah, be dumb. Sort of don't think about it, just do it. And that's the best way I suppose I can express of making that discipline. It's stopping those other thoughts in your brain, which allow you to rationalize your way out of doing something that is good. It's so insane that the brain can do this, but we're all human, we're all mere mortals, and that's what happens.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really interesting that you bring that up. It's like you have to stop yourself from doing something else to actually do the thing that you should be doing, I guess, or that you've chosen that you want to do. I think it is really easy for all of us to make these excuses for why we shouldn't do something. And I think that concept that you've come up with of, making yourself dumb is really helpful. You hear stories about people that are successful in their pursuits and things. And, it's because they had that like dumb beginners type of attitude towards it. Like they don't know any better a lot of times, right? So they just go and they do it. And because they do like actually do it, then they start to get better, or they achieve what they want to set out and achieve. Whereas, a lot of us sit back and be like, oh, but this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And if that goes wrong, then this will happen. And when that happens, this will happen and I'll have to do that. Like, I'm really guilty of that myself, man. I've been trying to pull myself out of that spiral whenever I can identify it, but it's so easy to fall into. But when you can just get out of your own way and just be like, well, why didn't I just do this?
Yeah. And it's funny because information isn't actually the helpful in a lot of cases. I'm reading a book at the moment called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So he's like a social scientist. He won a Nobel Prize in economics I think it was in like the 90s or 80s, something like that. A very, very, very popular book. And he talks about optimists in it. And he talks about optimists is like generally just a great trait to have in life. If you're an optimist, you're generally healthier, you have better relationships, you live longer. Like, it has all these positive benefits. And a lot of these optimists are entrepreneur type people. And when you talk with them, and he did some studies with them saying, okay, do you know the actual statistics of how many small businesses fail in in the first 5 years of starting up. It's like 90%. And all of them, you know, if you learned all the statistics for that, it would absolutely scare you away from starting something new. But that's also the things that, you know, create the best things in the world. Every single company that exists today is because someone had the idea of, you know, stuff this, I'm going to do it on my own. I'm going to make something of this. So it's funny that, yeah, more information actually isn't necessarily good as well, which you'd think like, oh, information is just a good thing in general. But when you look at it in that point of view, it's like, no, information could be actually what's stopping you. Same thing with the, you know, positive thinking. And so another one might be like self-help, right? If you're doing all these mantras in the morning, spending all this time almost trying to pressure yourself into doing something, maybe that time would be better spent not putting that pressure to, you know, positively, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to win today, I'm going to speak to 5 people, I'm going to make those sale calls. Maybe that time would be better spent almost not thinking about it, but developing some sort of way to, when you're in the moment where you need to do it, you just do it without thinking.
Totally. And I think, you know, these types of concepts, it's interesting to think about, and like it's really nice that people are able to, I guess, bring conversation around it. And it's like we think about, you know, what the modern world has been built on. It is, you know, largely on this like intellectual premise, right? That, you know, knowledge is power and all these sorts of things. But and like I can agree to a certain extent, and I'm sure we all can, right? But it's not like one way or another. It's not black and white. It's like this beautiful harmony that occurs in all things in life, right? And it's just like the intellectual mind. I think that it can be a very, very powerful tool, as we, you know, as we all, as modern humans have experienced, you know, but it can also be a major crutch at the same time, you know, if it is, you know, overused or it is over relied upon. So like you said, it's this self-talk, this negative spiral, or this whatever it is that can basically dictate or create a delusional reality for people. And I think these are the sorts of things that may drive people down a road of mental illness and things like this, is that it's an overactive intellectual mind and a overstimulated mind that doesn't really know how to discern between, you know, reality and, you know, the things that might be real for oneself, you know, sensation. And I think that when we, you know, flip it on the other side, and I think it's a great example to use. I guess it's the one that I like to use because I teach meditation, and I'm a daily practitioner and a disciple for life of meditation. Is that, you know, I love the way you put it in terms of making yourself dumb, because it really is about the simplistic things that you're doing. You know, when I first teach people how to meditate, I tell them, don't even focus on meditating, you know, or trying to meditate. You just want to sit and you just want to breathe, you know, and it's as simple as that. You don't want to do anything else. Don't even think about meditating. Don't even think about stopping your thoughts and all these other misconceptions about what it is like. And like, you know, it's easier said than done, of course, but, you know, these are the sorts of things that help us in, I guess, doing the things in an intentional manner and knowing what it is that we're doing it for. And like you said, not doing things for the sake of doing it without truly knowing what it is that we want to do behind them.
Yeah, that first meditation session for anyone, I think, is pretty eye-opening, where you sit down for 5 minutes, 10 minutes and just realize like, oh my God, what is going on inside of here?
Totally. I mean, you know, it's just one of those things. People are quite afraid of boredom and loneliness now, right? And their own space, you know, like finding space is my thing, and I feel like it's a big cure, and one of those places where you can cultivate a positive or I guess a personal space for yourself. It really is one of the things that can open, like the break open the doors of perception for you in your life. But I guess the difference is we've been sort of conditioned to rely upon all these external stimulus to keep us going and move us forward. And it's one of those things that we're, I guess, sadly are getting addicted to, you know, like I can say for myself, I'm guilty of, you know, picking up my phone and scrolling mindlessly for a little bit and then, you know, catching myself and saying, oh, you know, I was just, I needed that, or it was that craving, you know, I needed to satiate that for whatever reason. But yeah, as is the world that we live in, I suppose.
Yeah, those infinite feeds on social media, and you could even, you know, draw that to TVs and radio, and to a certain extent, that ability to continuously, like, there's no end.
Totally.
I think humans like endings for things. Like, you wouldn't read a book if it just kept on going and going and going. You want an ending to it. I avoid those infinite. Yeah, I think it's called infinite feeds, like on the Facebook homepage or the Instagram homepage, TikTok, whatever they are. I avoid those things like the plague, where you can just keep going and keep going. Yeah, I think social media, for me at least, is, yeah, use it like target, like in a targeted manner. Like, I go on for a certain objective, a point to do something, and then
Totally.
get rid of it as soon as I can after that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the paradox of living as well, I guess, in terms of like what you mentioned, people feeling like they want an end to things, right? But essentially, the way I see life as a whole, it's there is no end until the ultimate end is when we pass, right? In my mind, like, and I think this is like this paradoxical view of chasing after one thing, you know, once I get this, I will be, you know. I think I was one of those people who did that myself, in terms of, you know, the next job, the next promotion, the next pay rise, the next car, the house, all these sorts of things. But I think that in itself is a false or a fleeting way of looking at things. Because the way I see it, and you talked about this before, in terms of how you approach things in a stepped manner, you know, things don't happen straight away. They gradually occur. But to add on that, I don't feel we get to a place of mastery, so to speak, you know. Practice is never ending. And again, drawing back to meditation, like, I call it practicing the art of practice, right? It's like a humble pursuit for an unattainable mastery, but we still do it. And these are like simple principles that are derived, again, from Zen Buddhism and things like this. But I think it applies to all aspects of life. Like, this whole concept of, you know, trust the process and things like this. You know, people talk about that a lot. The life is the process, right? And we have to, once we get, you know, to an understanding of, you know, understanding that it never ends. We never stop at a certain point. We must be uncomfortable forever, comfortable with the uncomfortable, and continue to move through that until we do pass into whatever it is that, you know, wherever it is that we go after that. So it's a funny paradox.
Yeah, I think that's the best way of putting it. Paradox. Life is paradoxical, because, yeah, just think about anything. You want to set a goal for yourself, and that's how you progress forward. But when you think about it, like the long-term goal, and this is actually how Juan and I, my co-host, set out our goals. We have a long-term goal, which would be, or multiple, which is sort of, you know, 5-year, 10-year plus. And we intentionally make those somewhat vague in a sense. You know, it's not, you can't really know if you've hit that point. So it's not, I'm going to be a millionaire, I'm going to have $1 million. It's more like, you know, I want to be financially secure, maybe with some extra funds set aside for my family or emergencies, and just have enough that I don't need, you know, those extra things. Because, yeah, if you have $1 million, then people want that money as well. Like, there's such a weird thing of being like, you look at someone with 10 million, $1 billion, think, man, they've got it made. But god damn, the stress of having $1 billion would be insane. The amount of time you would spend thinking about protecting that $1 billion would be astronomical. You'd be full of anxiety all the time. So
Totally.
yeah, that life is just full of being able to hold those two different things at the same time. You know, sometimes it's black, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's gray. You can't always say, no, this thing's black, this thing is white.
And I love the way that you sort of put, I guess you guys' approach to goal setting, in that it's something to, I guess, aim for, not necessarily, like you said, physically, tangibly, black and white. It's not something that you must attain, but it's the general direction that you want to move to, you know. And I think that's important, right? Because again, I personally, I used to do a lot of very specific goal setting back in the day. I don't do it anymore because I just simply know which direction I want to continue walking in my life. And I think it serves a purpose at a point in time, in that if you are looking for whichever path that you feel like you need to walk down in life, it'll give you direction, but don't get too fixed upon attaining that or arriving at that destination, right? And we talk about that sometimes as well, Shaun and I, on the podcast, and that there's a utility to goal setting, in that, again, it's like I guess a post to aim toward, you know, a goal to walk toward, but it's not necessarily the thing that you must get. And if you don't get it, you know, what does that mean for you, right? That sometimes can be like the downfall for people who get upset, or they get discouraged because they don't get exactly what they've set out to, you know, quote unquote, you know, get.
Yeah. Juan and I had a fun discussion the other day about content for content's sake. And he said this, and it really, like, something about it really sounded wrong to me. Something about it sounded like untrue in a way. And we were sort of arguing about what sort of intentionality should you do behind doing something like posting on social media. Because he sort of comes from the camp of, like, more people are afraid of posting something because, you know, it's not the perfect picture, it's not the perfect design, you know, people are gonna not like it. Or he was talking about when Instagram had you could see the likes, the amount of likes on each one, and people would intentionally not post things because they weren't getting enough. And so he was saying, you know, content for content's sake, just put it out there, it's going to be fine. Whereas I was saying, well, also when you do that, you want to have a bit of purpose behind it. So you're not just putting out random shit for everyone to see with no coherence to it. And it's just, you know, it's like we've all met those people with no filters, and they just spew out whatever the hell is on their mind. And most of the time it's just absolute rubbish. And that has its place in the world, but for the most part, I think that's probably something you should actually have a little bit of thought on. So yeah, and like, again, that just gets back to the paradox of, you don't want everything to be intentional. So, you know, I'm not saying like, oh, every post you should know exactly what you're doing, and this is, you know, the reason you're doing this. You know, every time you go out to exercise, you shouldn't have, you should only have this goal planned and structured to this exact finite detail. No, that's silly. Obviously that's silly, but having that general purpose as well helps. So it's sort of like finding the balance between those two. Yeah. Finding a good path.
Yeah. And it's difficult, right? Because, like, when we think about it, we set goals to achieve the things that are like these macro things that we think we want in our lives, or that we've arrived to after, you know, introspection and all these things. And, you know, one might be like, I want to be financially secure, but then what does that mean to you? And then by what time do you need to have that? Right. And like, it's really interesting to me, paradox of, like, we're all doing these actions and doing things in the micro to reach this macro, whatever it is. Right. And that macro thing is so vague when you really boil it down a lot of times. Right. But we're trying to put these like really structured time goals against it. And, you know, when you don't achieve them, that does something to your confidence as well. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, right? It's like you set all these goals for things, and maybe you don't even think really about why you're setting them in that way, right? You've just been told all this shit about like, you need to get like SMART goals and you be specific and measurable and accurate and realistic and timed. And you do it on this page and make sure you only do 7 a day or actually do 3 a day and then titrate it up and all this shit, right? But then it's like, why am I actually doing all this? Like, what's the reason?
Yeah.
Right. And when you get to that level, you kind of start to shift your thinking. Well, for me, it has anyway. Right. And like, I've got these states, I guess, that I want to get to, right? Places that I want to find myself in, or a feeling that I want to find myself in. And I'm like, that's so fucking vague, man. Like, but there are little steps you can do along the way. Right. And the interesting thing for me has just been really learning to win the day. And like, you know where you're going, you do have an idea of the things that are going to get you there. And some things need to be done by a certain time frame. I think that's where like the timed nature of goals matters, right? Because a lot of times we're doing things with other people and we need to agree on a time scale for when things need to be sorted or done or achieved for the next thing to happen, because other people are relying on those things. But when it comes to ourselves, you know, I feel a lot of times you don't really stop to think about that. It's like, why does this need to happen in this time frame that I'm setting?
Yeah, that's so true, man. It's it's interesting talking with people when you get really deep about what exactly it is that they want from life. And it's funny because it is so hard to, it's not like an easy question. You just pose like, oh, Shaun, what is it that you want from life? What's the, you know, it's like asking, what's the meaning of life?
Yeah.
Fuck, I don't know. But when you get down to it, a lot of people will say very similar things. It's, you know, I want to have good friends and relationships with my family. I want to have something that gives me purpose and, you know, avoid the avoidable suffering that life has. And it's funny when you get down to it of you as a person as well, because who you are changes all the time. So setting those goals, while one version of you really enjoys it, another version of you in 6 months time, 12 months time will be like, wow, this was useless. I had that recently. I set myself a goal last year of reading 50 books in a year. And at the start, it was great because it was forcing me to read a lot more. I was probably, you know, instead of reading 2 or 3 books a month, I was reading closer to 4 or 5. But then by the end, I was just arbitrarily reading shit books just to be able to say that I finished them.
Yeah.
Whereas normally I would have just dropped them because, you know, I wasn't getting any value from them. So having like some compassion for yourself for something being useful at one point in time and then not useful in another point as well is pretty important.
Yeah, that's really interesting, man. I'd like to stay on that for a bit because I'm the sort of person as well that I'll set a goal for something or like a metric, and then I'm like, I have to hit it at all costs, right? Yeah. And the book thing hits home for me because I did the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to read this much every day. And because I thought to myself, you know, everyone successful says you need to read and that, you know, it's the gateway to greater knowledge and all of that stuff, which I totally agree with, right? But it's like when you find yourself sitting there reading the 12th page and you can't remember what was on the last 11, you kind of just stop and ask yourself, like, what am I doing this for, right? And it's really conflicting because you're like, well, I keep getting told that I need to be doing this and you know, it seems like it's the right idea, but then inside you're like, this isn't really doing much for me. Like instead, maybe if I watched a YouTube video about it, maybe that'd be better, or listen to a podcast. And it's just, we get all these prescriptive measures, right? For like what's quote unquote good for us. And then we keep going down. And I think it's interesting that like a lot of the times we get really far down that path without realizing. And then you're like, wait a minute. And that's interesting to me. And I guess I want to talk about that because you're someone who, you know, has tried a lot of different things. And I'm curious to know, when do you decide that, you know, I'm done with this part, or maybe I've learned all the things that I want to achieve, or I'm at a certain level of proficiency and then I'm going to try something new? Is there like a point that you hit? Is there a feeling you get? Like, what's that like for you? Because a lot of the times as well, you know, with structure and commitment and discipline, we're told, you know, see something through to the very end. But like, what if you fucking hate it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, geez, if you think about it, that's almost every sort of business and goal-driven book ever. Everyone's asking, you know, we all know the good things to do, but what's the main balance that we should do between, and when's that cutting off point of letting go of something because it's not useful and then sticking with it that extra 12 months. For me, just trying to think back of all the things I've sort of done. One is I err more on the side of I'll talk myself out of it quicker than I probably should. So usually, if I start to feel something's not really working, I'll still give it an extra 20%, for example. So say I have I used to do this with my workouts. I'd sort of have this structure of, I'd go to the gym and I'd want to try this exercise. And this is particularly when you're first starting off as well. Man, I want to do this exercise. That looks really cool. Oh, that machine's interesting. Okay, I'll do this for this week. And then next week I'll try this other thing. And you eventually just figure out that, okay, well, while this is sort of fun, I'm not developing that strength in that one particular area because I'm just, confusing everything. I'm doing this over here and that's not translating to this over here. So, I found some like general rules for myself, which would be, I don't know how to do that, what that point is and how I came to these. I think it's more just trial and error, but it's something along the lines of, number one, just have compassion for yourself, no matter what you're doing. If you're struggling with something, just understand that it's going to fade away at some point. Like this momentary thing that you're hating or not enjoying, it's probably going to go away. So just have compassion for yourself for that. Experiment as well, and then you'll end up finding, I think, the human brain is very good at finding patterns of what's working and what's not over certain periods of time. So for me, I now have like every time I do a workout structure, I do it for 4 weeks. So like 4 weeks, no changing, no matter what. And that amount of time, I can maybe realize like, oh, maybe doing handstands after doing like overhead press isn't so great because my shoulders are fried and I'm just not going to be able to do anything. Okay, I'll learn that, but I'm still going to stick with it for 4 weeks. You can handle that and maybe you'll learn something new. Same with books. Like I'll read 10% of a book. If by then it's not doing anything for me, all right, then I'll chuck it. And so I'm sort of like squirming around the question because I don't know how to put a definitive answer on it. But that's, I guess, like the general sort of tactics that I use for myself.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like you've got these rules where there's like a gauge and then you get to that part and then you reassess.
Yeah.
Which sounds clever to me because, I think there's also this trap that we can fall into, which is when we do think about having compassion for ourselves, we're like, well, I don't really like this, so why do I need to do this? But there's so many elements of our lives where, there's this long lead time to reap the benefit. And in that lead time, it's a pretty shitty pursuit. Like it doesn't feel great. Like when you start working out after a long period of not working out, you're like, oh, fuck, man, this like, it hurts. It's painful. I'm really sore today. If I wasn't working out and I didn't feel sore before, so maybe I should just stop working out. But like we all know that if you just stick with it, persist, you're not going to be as sore come the coming weeks. If you learn how to recover properly and, feed yourself well and all of that, you'll be fine. And it will actually start to get much better for you and you'll be healthier for it. So I think it's clever to like have these gauges and these metrics in place where you're like, I'll get to this point and then I'll reassess it. Yeah. It's like commitment to the point and then we'll assess where we go from there.
Yeah. And it's funny because we all know the things that we should be doing, or for the most part, it's probably like 20% getting influenced by others, but 80% is something we know we should be doing. And that's the best thing. Do you guys have any thoughts of what it is, like why we humans are able to talk our way out of doing the things that we know we should do, like not following what we know is right? Because I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, so we talk about this quite a bit as well. And like, for me, it boils down to, I think people just don't want to do hard shit.
Yep.
And that's for a number of reasons. One of them being like just evolutionary, like when shit's hard, like we want to be comfortable. We want to be, safe. We want to make sure that we're in a position where we're going to survive, right? So putting yourself in hard situations kind of goes against that a lot of times because you're putting yourself in a place of discomfort. You're straining, it's strenuous, it's hard, right? And when you do that, you run the risk of damaging things. period. Right. And I think that's why we talk ourselves out of a lot of things. It's to protect ourselves from the discomfort of it. And we've had experience before, like maybe where you've started down the road or something, like it didn't go so well, or it made you feel really uncomfortable. You're like, well, I don't want to feel like that again. So I'm just not going to do it. And I think that's why we talk ourselves out of doing a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So then maybe like the trick in life is to find those really uncomfortable things, and then somehow putting a spin on it, whether that's through, Pavlovian training by giving yourself a reward at the end, or whether that's, developing that mindset of, enjoying the discomfort. I think a lot of that's sort of the Navy SEAL type mentality where it's, something so unbearably just like uncomfortable or painful. And then the default response to that in your own mind should be good. I'm glad it's this, uncomfortable. I'm glad that this hurts so much. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's interesting to me that you've got these metrics as well, because I do the same thing now. Before I was just like, by any means, I will get to the end. And look, man, that yielded some very good results for me in certain areas of my life, right? So like for me, for the training thing, for example, I'd be like, I'm going to do this for the next 6 months. And like whatever happened, man, I would do it. And I think that for me was more along the lines of, I want to, I guess, galvanize my mindset into being the type of person that when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. That's just a decision I made. And then I tried to follow that up with my actions. Right. But nowadays I'm like, you realize the cost and the sacrifice of doing that, and that you actually forego the benefits of other areas in your life when you're that rigid about shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a time and place for different things. I guess, if you are in a place where perhaps you've let your health go, for example, for a long period of time, that's going to take a long time to get back to a place of, good homeostasis and health. So you might need to commit for a long period of time. But if it's like something, for example, at the start of the year, I wanted to learn how to make pasta. And like when I want to learn how to do something, like I want to become like really good at it. That's my goal generally, right? But I started making pasta and I was doing it like twice a day, dude. Like pasta really has no utility for me in my life. I'm not opening like an Italian restaurant. It's not like a thing. And then I got like 3 weeks, 4 weeks in, and I was like, why am I doing this like twice a day, every day? Like, and the reason I bring that up is like a certain level of proficiency is enough in certain areas of your life. And there's a place for deep commitment, and then there's other places where it just doesn't make sense. And I think it's really important for us to discern that for ourselves. Like, not everything has to be hard. I think that's one thing that comes up all the time generally now as well. It's like, always choose the hard path. When something comes in front of you, like all these gurus, they tell you like, when you're faced with 2 decisions, the easy path or the difficult one, always take the difficult one. I'm like, and it's like one of those bullshit rules and like things that we hear that when you think a bit more about it, it's like, that doesn't actually sound right. Like when you really boil it down, like not everything's meant to be hard.
Well, I think that stuff, again, like everything that is said, must be taken contextually. And I think that is super important. Like, it's so easy that we can scroll through, social media or go on YouTube and listen to like motivational people talk about, or like gurus or people who are knowledgeable, drop a quote here and there. You can pull a quote out of any book from history, and like it sounds beautiful and it like resonates with people. But at the same time, you have to understand what the context is behind that. And I think that comes down to like, this whole discussion that we're having. For me, it comes back to the question that you have to ask yourself, like, why are you doing it? Like, what is the reason? Like for the book example, like Shaun mentioned, there's all these posts out on social media that, all CEOs read like 52 books a year, something like this. And, the word CEO or the position of CEO pertains to something successful. So is that something that people want, right? If that's what you want, then that this is the formula, this is the causal effect. Reading 52 books will turn you into a CEO, something like this, right? But people aren't understanding the foundational principles behind why that made someone successful. It's not so much that they actually read exactly 52 books every year to become a CEO. It's that they derived some knowledge from it and became wise from absorbing certain types of knowledge, you know, in a certain field, whatever it is that they wanted to excel or succeed at, right? So like that example in itself, like I read daily, I read a lot, but like when people ask me for book recommendations, I I pause and I struggle to give that to them, because what I'm resonating with right now and I like to read would be very different contextually to someone else, because we're all unique individuals. We're all at different stages of our lives, you know. Like for me, book recommendations should come from yourself, you know. That's how I that's the cues that I take in terms of what I should read next, you know. What feels like a topic or a type of book or an author or whatever it is that I want to, or I feel drawn toward at the moment, is what I read, you know. And I think that is the principle that should be, I guess, adopted for everything in life. It's not about external direction to say that you should do this, you should do that. It's what feels right for you. And I think that in itself, saying that, it's easy enough for me to say, but we're not taught how to, you know, listen to those internal cues to direct us as individuals on the path that we innately want to walk or need to walk, you know, or are put here on this earth to walk. So it's an interesting thing. It takes a lot of, again, practice for you to essentially sit and listen and then hear those voices or those cues inside your body to say, okay, you know, it's the same thing in terms of like any type of growth, exercise, things like this. Like you need acute levels of stress in order to grow and evolve, right? So listen to your body. You know, when people say that, like when you're like being instructed by a personal trainer or a yoga instructor and things like this, listen to your body. You know, if you're a first time yoga practitioner, don't go and try and do, you know, a crow pose or a whatever it is, if your body won't allow you in that moment, right? So I think it's an interesting thing. Like there's this, again, it comes back to this balance and harmony of what you can easily, tangibly intellectualize by someone directing you, this is good for you, so do exactly X, Y, and Z, versus I intuitively can feel what would benefit me as an individual, right?
Yeah. I think, yeah, and what you were just talking about then resonated with me really deeply, in that you're not really told how to follow your own interests, follow those intrinsic things that you're really, you know, deeply intrigued by for whatever reason. And you don't have to put a reason for it. You know, there's people out there who will create, you know, just crochet things because they love it. You know, nothing that interests me, but for them, it's like the best thing in the world. And I think, you know, what I'm really hoping is that in the future we'll start to see, with the advance of like AI being able to take away more manual labor, more you know, us able to convert energy in different ways so that we free up more, I guess, just consciousness in a way. Like every single person out there who's being a you know, truck driver is using their consciousness for driving on the roads, and that sort of seems to me like a real waste. Like, you know, there's probably like 5 truck drivers out there who just love the act of driving, but everyone else is like, this is a job, right? So I think what I would love to see, and then in the future, I guess, is just people following their interests. And that's sort of, you know, what we talked about in my bio. At the moment, that's all I do. I just, if I find something that's intriguing, I go down that route and I will just follow it until it stops, or I get diverted onto something else. And that's okay, having, you know, multiple just branching out of these ideas and interests. The only thing I would add to that, though, is I see that pretty much as purely positive, but the only thing that can trip you up with that is you get caught in a spiral of the same reinforcement. And so that's what you hear on like the negative things of YouTube, for example. The algorithms, you click on one video and then it's like, you know, maybe slightly risque, got some interesting views, and then it sort of leads you further down and down, and then next thing you're deep into like Nazi propaganda. Okay, well that's one, the YouTube algorithms doing that. That's a totally different question and probably way too deep to answer here. But one of the things that I noticed for me was the one time in my life I think I had really distorted views and really unhealthy views of particularly women, because when I was trying to overcome my anxieties with talking with them, I sort of delved into like the PUA, pickup artist culture a bit. And the thing with that is, it is helpful. It does give you tips and tricks of how to create conversations, how to, you know, the general things that you think you just learn as a human, but for whatever reason, I didn't really have those social cues and skills developed in me when I was younger. But then that, you know, if I followed that path really deeply, I went into a lot of blogs and stuff, and I got to a place where I started, you know, viewing women as more like a transactional thing. If you do these certain amounts of like steps and you have this amount of charm, you say these things, then you can get them into this place, and then, you know, eventually to sleep with you. Which nowadays, yeah, I look at it and it's like, oh God, that's so ridiculous. Like, why? If you look at them in that way, that's just a terrible way of doing it. You're going to make yourself unhappy, them unhappy, like the world a worse place. So the only thing I would add to like following your interests and that thing that you're passionate about is every now and then look at the other side of the argument. So I did this recently with Wim Hof. I got into his sort of like breathing method, and I would intentionally, like, I was just following it and I was like, oh man, this is really interesting. This is really cool. And then for maybe like an hour, I just went onto like Reddit or YouTube and tried to, you know, was typing in things like Wim Hof bullshit or Wim Hof, you know, charlatan, just trying to find, okay, are there actual negatives to following this as well? Is there, what's the other side of the argument against this? I think that's pretty helpful as well for whatever you're pursuing. Just taking that little bit of time and researching, like, maybe, you know, being a bodybuilder, injecting myself with steroids and getting huge, maybe there are some negatives to that, which there totally are.
Mm.
Yep.
And I
Sure.
think, like,
and I guess,
sorry, you go.
Sorry, Les. Really, you're talking about being a critical thinker, right? And having that faculty front of mind as well, is like, not everything we're told is the truth. And we are, you know, as humans, so biased towards the things that we resonate with, and we all find ourselves going down that path. And it's why we defend our views so vehemently a lot of the time, and, you know, why we try to make other people come around to the way we think about things. When you actually take a step back and be like, wait, what's the other side? What, maybe I don't have all the answers. That's when you start to realize, shit, there's a lot more out there, and really need to be questioning things at large all the time. I totally agree with what you were explaining there, man.
Yeah. I just think that, like, especially these days, like it is so necessary, you know, for us to have that perspective, you know, and that's why it's largely why, you know, the podcast really came to be, is that, you know, Shaun and I represent different poles of, I guess, belief or points of view. We come from very different perspectives, but we are able to converse about them and have a civil discussion. And I think, like, it comes back to that point you made before about the amount of information, right? It just is so necessary these days, because there is just infinite amounts of information, like, at our fingertips, that it is, you know, it is very, very difficult or even impossible for us to discern what is real for us, or real for us individually or collectively, right? And, like, for me, there are little tools and tips that we can take from, you know, I guess, the past or history. And people, you know, if you look back there, you can look at trends, and it's the same thing as people who, you know, gamble, or people who, I guess, look at global markets or anything like this, right? It's trend related. But you look back farther and farther into recorded history. There are things like symbols. There are things like, there's wisdom from people that are age old that still holds true to this day. In times where it was much more simpler in terms of information, in terms of life, in terms of how people lived. And for me, that is a way that helps me greatly in terms of keeping life at a very simple level as a foundation, and remembering to peel back all these layers of information and complexity, and coming back to this space of simplicity for yourself. What is the foundation of your life supposed to be? Outside of trying to make it so convoluted and complex, underneath that, there is just, this raw human layer of wisdom that is so directive and so, I guess, clear, but it's very difficult to find, again, like we said, in this very complex and convoluted and noisy world, right? But I think there's a lot to that if people are willing to, I guess, delve back and look at things in history. I'm a big Eastern philosophy guy. I look back at people like Lao Tzu. His wisdom is timeless. Yeah, it still, rings true to this day. Even some philosophers in the, Enlightenment period, Friedrich Nietzsche and Carl Jung and people like this. Carl Jung especially, he's one of the guys who looks at symbols, and you look back at these very archaic sort of symbols in recorded history people have found. They mean the same thing back 2,000 plus years ago as they do now. You look at myth and how stories were told back in the day versus what the symbolism and meaning behind these things are supposed to represent. They mean the same thing as they do today. So it's a very interesting way to look at it. So for me, it's all about, again, it's keeping it simple. And again, it's very easy for me to say, but infinitely more difficult to practice, especially in this, super fast-paced modern world that we live in.
Yeah, if you look at some of the research done in chaos theory, for example, which is basically that they can create these absolutely amazing patterns and details from very simple formulas. So the Mandelbrot set is one of them. So if you're at home and just listening, it's worth going to check some of these things up, because they're just stunning visual illustrations of a really simple mathematical formula. I can't remember exactly what the Mandelbrot set is, but it creates this, just infinite pattern of waves and swirls, where if you dive in deeper and deeper, it gets more complex, and it sort of repeats itself, but in new and intriguing, more complex manners. Another really cool one is Langton's ant, which is just like a very simple, imagine a grid with white and black, and an ant has a very simple formula. If it goes onto a white square, it turns right. If it goes onto a black square, it turns left. And it just creates, you set this ant down in like a little, setup, and it just creates these infinitely complex, like black and white things, and it just moves, it's just fascinating how, from all the complexity there is in life, you can get down to really simple rules. Another pretty funny one in the same book I was just mentioned before, in Thinking Fast and Slow, people were trying to figure out, I guess, what was causing bad relationships and people to divorce. And they were going through all these, statistical analyses of, everything from like genetics, blood type, to the amount of communication and all these crazy things. And they were coming up with like these super complex algorithms to try and figure it out. And then this one guy came up with one which was equally as predictive, which was, I think it was like the number of times love making versus minus the amount of quarrels they have in like a week. And that was just as predictive as like this insanely huge database of things. So yeah, the complexity of life is amazing and cool and fun, but when you get down to it, it's the simple things that will matter, and that translates to your personal life as well. I'm sure for you, Leslie, it's that daily meditation practice of, it's simple. It's one of the most simple things you can do, being on your own, but that's probably one of the most transformative you've had.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think we talk about this a lot, and I guess it shows the transition of my own personal evolution in terms of my philosophy and approach to life. Like a few years back, Shaun and I, we sort of talked about these things called personal creeds, and we'd sort of write these, I guess, statements to ourselves to represent our principles and values. And back then, I had quite a complex one, 7 or 8 lines worth, and it was very prescriptive in terms of who I thought I was or what I wanted my life to be. But right now, and it's been this way for a couple of years, it's simply more and less, and that's all it is, and it represents everything that I do in life. I'm just trying to find more in less, and find more depth and more color in the simpler things in life. And again, like a perfect example, like the meditation, my daily meditation, like I mentioned off the top, like I just sit, but I just allow whatever happens within that meditative state to guide me and take me wherever it needs to take me at the time, so I think it's like, again, it's this funny paradox of, doing and being, right? There needn't be a heavy focus on one or the other. I think being sort of should influence or motivate a type of doing, and not the other way around. But yeah, it's a funny thing. I mean, coming from being brought up in the modern world and being taught that doing is going to give you everything that you want, it's a very difficult process to wind yourself out of, for sure.
Yeah, the ancient religions, almost all of them have some sort of state to enter in where you're in the present moment, however you go about it. So whether it's through prayer or meditation or whatever sort of system they develop, that's essentially one of the common themes you find in all of them. They have this ability to make you not think about the past, not think about the future, but just this moment, this right now.
Yeah, for sure. And there's definitely something to be said about presence in what you're doing, because as Les said, this podcast was born out of us coming from these two different kind of ends of the spectrum and polarity on certain things. And I guess one of the things that we talk about and don't always agree on is the being versus the doing, or the doing becoming the being, right? Whereas for me, I'm one of those people that, well, for me anyway, it's like work beats worry, action beats anxiety. Like that's what works for me, right? I found that like whenever I'm starting to feel a bit funky, I'm like, why am I feeling like this? And then I'll start to do something that I know I should be doing. I'll take action on something that I've been putting off, and then that gets me to a better state. But I know that's not the answer for everyone. And so, there's one thing that's definitely come up for me though has been the presence, right? Which I mentioned earlier, which is you can be doing a million things, but then where are you actually getting to? Whereas if you're present in doing the one thing and realize why you're doing it, having the intention behind it, you're bound to go much further, right? And there is definitely more and less. That's one thing I do agree with Les on, right? Because I was one of those guys who always kept trying to find like the perfect formula for the day. And if I use this, schedule, I'll do this in the morning, do this in the afternoon, use this tool to do that. And it just really complicated shit, right? And then came across this concept years ago, right, from Andy Frisella. It's just like the power list. And he's like, just choose 5 things, 5 critical tasks for the day, do those. And when you're done, like that's it for the day. Like if you finish at 11:30, that's your day done. You can fuck off for the rest of the day, but just get those 5 things done. And, I'd do it for a while and be like, fuck, this really works. And I'm like, it's profound how doing less can actually yield more for you, right? And it's not so much that it's like less in terms of its impact. It's like less in terms of volume, because we keep getting told like the more you do, the more you get, and it's just not true, man.
Yeah, it's yeah, I'm seeing tons of parallels between you two and me and Juan. He's I'm definitely more in like a sort of Leslie type, more meditation and like the, I guess, like relaxing side of things in that way. And then Juan definitely seems to be more like, he can't sit still and meditate, but he'll find a moment of quiet, and which like necessary when you're doing like a 200 kilo squat or something, you know, absolutely ridiculous. And he'll find that same thing. And I think it's yeah, I'd say there's a lot of similarities between the our pairs as well, of you know, having differences but also like a common uniting theme behind that as well.
Yeah, and I think there's something really interesting to that in itself, right? That you know, you and Juan found each other and get along, and you have that relationship. Les and I, you know, we've known each other for years. We're best mates. Les is like my brother, right? So, but we're very different. And there's something to be said about that, which is this macro balance of life, right? Like balance is one of those things that, you know, is really interesting to look at. My personal view on it is that like balance in the short term is pretty much bullshit, that it balances out in the macro. Like we have these intense periods of focus that, you know, sometimes we're really focused on our families, sometimes we're really focused on our work, sometimes really focused on our health, and sometimes focused on whatever passion we're pursuing, right? But in the macro, they all kind of tend to balance out. And for me anyway, it's been really difficult to try to be like, I'm going to give this much time to my family today, this much time to my work, this much time to my passion, this much time to my health. You know, there are people that do that, and I think that's really commendable, to be honest. But for me, what I found in practical experience is that like things just tend to balance out in the macro, right? There's like intensity in one area, intensity in another area, and we tend to find this flow and this balance. And I bring that up because it seems like that's what you found with Juan, that's what I found with Les, and I think that's something interesting for people to think about, which is, you know, having this polarity in your life, like it tends to balance you out and make things really, really nice and fun.
Yeah, almost as in, you know, we talked a lot about the, you know, differences, not being able to concretely say the polarities, and yeah, polarities in life, not being able to say this is exactly this, or the paradoxical nature. And it's almost like what you guys do and what we did was almost like seeking it out on purpose to, you know, gradually acclimatize to it. So that's why it's fun having those conversations with Juan where we disagree on something, or, you know, it's maybe like a superficial disagreement. We're not going to immediately, you know, daggers drawn where we're at differences. No, it's like, okay, oh, that's interesting. You think totally different than me on this one sense. And that sort of like gets you ready for the paradoxical nature of life, which is you need to get used to this thing, but then it's also going to be this in like a year's time or tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. And it also like it keeps you open and can bring you around to things that you wouldn't have been exposed to before. And bring you to levels of understanding that you didn't have before. You know, one of those areas for me is like that I've learned from Les is just everything we need is in us, right? I was always that guy who kept trying to find the answer externally. I'm like, if I learn these things, if I learn how to be this type of way, if I get really good at that thing, and, you know, trying to find the answer everywhere outside, instead of just stopping and, you know, listening to myself, tuning to my heart. It can sound really, I guess, like lofty and wafty for people, but, you know, that's how I felt about it at the time. Like Les would be like, dude, everything we need is within us. And I'd be like, yeah, man, sounds cool. Like, I get where you're coming from, but I just never really believed it. But then we'd talk about it and he'd keep explaining things to me. And then one day it just clicked for me. I was like, fuck, man, he was right.
Yeah.
And you can only come to those understandings if you give yourself the space to do that. And if you actually, you know, for me as well, is like, don't hold on so fervently to the person you think you're meant to be, right? Like we're all a lot of us get trapped in like these identities that we think ways we should be, who we told we are, and we want to keep projecting that, right? But it's like, if you love heavy metal music, but then you also like ballet, like that's cool, man. You don't have to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And you know, being open to that is what's going to allow you to find these different points of view, see if they resonate with you or not, and then actually see if you enjoy things or not, and get more out of life, essentially.
Yeah, and that's great. A great point where you mentioned of the identities and not getting too fixed on one thing. I used to do that with soccer. I always sort of saw myself as, you know, like the soccer kid. So from like 10 to 20, that's all like a large part of my identity. And then when I was sort of like early 20s and I was starting to feel, you know, I was taking a lot of time, this is actually beating up my body a lot. That's when I was like, all right, I'm going to have to drop this. But at the time, that was like my main thing. And it's funny, like looking back then, like I suppose like the worst, most depressive, most anxious time of my life was when, like a combination of factors. That was when, I lost that identity of being like the soccer kid. That was also when my fitness was the worst. So I, was just like, you know, not getting overweight. I'm always pretty naturally skinny, but I was eating like absolute trash and not exercising. Also combined with not having a structured routine. That was when I was moving out of home for like one of the first times. So I had free reign. I would stay up late. And the final one with that was sleep. Was I was working in the mine, so I was going underground for like 3 days, then come up for a 4-day rest, then switching to 3 night shifts, then 3 days off, and like my schedule was just absolutely in tatters all the time. So yeah, that ties in with like that identity though, having that one thing. And that's probably why it's like good to branch off and have a couple of different things. So if one of them disappears, it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. That's, you know, I've still got this other stuff.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to this this word attachment to what we I guess it's popularly known as the ego these days, right? And if you think about however you want to call it, ego, identity, what is this made of? And realistically, they're just ideas, right? That you've picked up throughout the course of your life, you know, through different experiences that you've had. But there comes a point where you can ask yourself the question and be able to discern between what is, I guess, a creation of the thought versus what is truly yourself, right? And this is like this concept that, you know, Eckhart Tolle has made it popular with his books, and you know, just talking about what the ego truly is. And it's just a bunch of ideas that you've pulled together essentially, and you've clung onto forever, and you have a very strong attachment to it. And this is why I sort of gravitate towards Eastern philosophy, in that it teaches us not to be so attached to anything in particular. And I think, again, it comes back down to, if you talk about it simplistically, you take away the complexities of, you know, the ideas and intellectualization and things like this, then you really just find the truth of what your life is about for yourself as an individual, right? And when you are able to transcend ideas and not be too fixed on one thing or another, and have this, you know, dualistic lens on all things, you know, if I stand on one side, that means the other side is my enemy, and or vice versa, this sort of thing, then you are able to have open dialogue and be, you know, I guess, nourished by different perspectives of thought. And I can understand where you've come from and where you've built certain, you know, points of view, Kyrin, and I can do the same with Shaun. I can understand that he sees things this way because of the way he was brought up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I will see it that way. But I see his point of view, and I can understand why he thinks that way. And like, you know, I think this is the beauty of relationships, right? Any relationship. And this is why I feel quite strongly that your closest relationships are are going to be your greatest teachers. My wife is my greatest teacher because, she can trigger me so easily, right? Because we see each other every single day. But again, that isn't necessarily because of what she's doing. It's because there's a reflection of what is inside of me that, something that I'm not, I guess I'm not happy with, or I do not agree with, So instead of making a point to, be on the attack or defensive, it's about an opportunity to inquire within and ask myself, why is it that I get triggered by certain things in certain circumstances by certain people? And it's a great tool to better understand oneself through the interaction with others.
Yeah. That introspection is probably, I suppose, like one of the defining things for me of between like periods of my life where I've been, relatively happy or found purpose and meaning, and those where it was, just blindly, searching in the dark for something and not really finding anything. That looking inside, I think it'd be nice if everyone was able to have like that moment of almost like selflessness, whether that be through meditation or psychedelics, or however it's found, or entering a flow state through intense physical exercise, however that is. I question how many people have actually felt that sort of thing in their life, and how much it would change them. Because I know for me, it changed. Just those moments. And there's a couple of moments I can like really point out and look at and be like, oh wow, yeah, that's changed me a lot. That one instant where I just looked at myself and was like, what's really going on here? Like, why is this stuff happening? And yeah, usually a lot of that is through relations with other people. So it's interesting, some parallels there.
Yeah. And I think like, Shaun and I talk about this a lot as well. And the other thing that, is just one of these, and we don't have the answer to this question, but in terms of like inciting change or having those sorts of moments, light bulb moments, as people popularly know it as, is there a requirement for not only those types of sought out experiences, but states of trauma for oneself, to then shake someone out of a state of delusion or automation, so to speak, out of this automaton state. I've had my own, like, mine was cancer. Everyone knows that from the podcast. I've talked about it a few times. Before that, I was just going through the motions, as many do. But outside of that, like, Shaun and I talk about this all the time. We ask the question, like, is it required? Is trauma required for us to, to grow? And I guess this is that archetypical story that Joseph Campbell talks about, the hero's journey. There's always this tipping point where one has to face some form of struggle and push through in order to grow from the experience, right? So I think it's an interesting thing, like outside of, again, seeking out these things that induce flow states, like you said, meditation, psychedelics, plant medicine, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've never really thought of that. Do you think it might be like the intensity of the experience or like the just unshakable nature of reality? Like if you have cancer, there's no way of getting around like that knowledge or that fact. Same, I suppose, if you have those, that's probably what psychedelics are, really good at. If you take like, however many grams of mushrooms or LSD or whatever, something's going to happen, and it's going to be pretty big. Like it's not something you can deny.
Totally. I mean, like for me, when I talk about my experience with cancer, it was, it comes back down to this feeling of knowing something was amiss in my life, but I had ignored it, right? Because, you know, back to the point that we were talking about before, it was something difficult, it was daunting, it was scary to face those types of questions that I was potentially going to ask myself, you know? So I would suppress them, and then you'd ignore them, and then you'd distract yourself, or you'd escape through, you know, alcohol, drugs, whatever, until it come to a point where you can no longer ignore it, right? And that was cancer for me. Like, I could no longer ignore it. And I feel the same way with like the state of the world right now. I've mentioned this before, like there's this parallel between what happens at a micro level, like a personal level. It is too like a reflection of what's happening collectively, at a macro level, and vice versa, right? I think that, you know, we as a people, as a society, have been moving in a certain way for far too long, and knowing that there's certain things that we should probably address in a certain way, right? We may have lost our way a little bit in terms of like the direction that we're going as a people, as a society. And then all this crazy shit on a global scale has been happening this year, right? You know, the bushfires and coronavirus and all the social unrest in the States and all these sorts of things. It's just coming to a head. And what does this stuff mean? Like, we're in this place where we simply cannot ignore the things that are happening in the world, right? So we have to choose. We're at this crossroads now. It's either we, you know, grow through it, or we just perish, right? And I think that's sort of the parallel, the analogy. And I think that we face these at different degrees throughout our life, and it's a choice point every time, like between expansion and contraction, right?
Yeah, I resonate with that sort of individuality of every action that you make is sort of a reflection of the world. I recently read the Gulag Archipelago, or like the shortened version, the abridged version, and he talks in that about how, you know, that one of the, if you really dive into it, it's probably like the most anti-human regime I've just ever heard of. Like, just the ability that they had to mess with the, like, just reality and for certain individuals and for basically everyone in it. The people inflicting the pain and the torture and the horrors on the others were just as much in denial of reality as the people who were like willingly, almost willingly, sort of going into the death camps and then toiling away in them and whatnot. And yeah, his you know, basic learning from, I think he spent 10 years in the camps and then a long time in exile after that, was your individual actions do matter. So even though it doesn't feel like they do, even though your individual vote doesn't feel like it does, and statistically you can, yeah, once again, this is, you know, enough information. If you looked at it statistically, there's no point in voting. Your one vote doesn't make a difference, but it actually does if you view it from like a different psychological sort of point of view. So yeah, all the social unrest and things like that. Yeah, I can resonate with that, with a collective, and a collective, but also that collective is made of individuals. So an individual, when you get down to it, level of, you know, denying that whatever it is that the, you know, the environment's, you know, we're damaging it through whatever use it is, whether that's carbon or whether that's plastics or, you know, all those sorts of discussions. Same with, yeah, like racial inequality or any of the really big popping points at the moment. Yeah, coronavirus, like I guess like our inability to still not communicate effectively between different countries and, you know, sort of view the world not just as individuals, but as a collective whole, where, you know, the actions of some people in China, in, you know, the wet markets or whatnot, really affects everyone in Norway. And you'd think like, what the hell, how does that happen? But, you know, we're sort of seeing that now, which is interesting.
Yeah, you said there was something you said was really interesting. The way you said it was like the unshakable nature of reality, right? You asked us like, what do you think it is about us having to have these, you know, big moments? Is it the unshakable nature of reality? And when you said, I was like, I think that's it. it's like something gets to a point where it's just too much to ignore.
Mm.
And then you have to do something about it. And then once we get there, it's like, you just can't ignore it anymore. And that's what I've noticed in those moments when people do actually make a shift, make a change, commit to being very different to how they are. It's that like the pain is too much, or it's like you can't ignore whatever is being told to you anymore. It's just like emblazoned, it's just blaring, it's glaring, and you can't ignore anymore. So you have to do something about it. And
yeah, that actually just got me thinking. Like I've generally sort of viewed virtual reality as a good thing, in the sense that it'll just open you to like some really intriguing experiences which you would never have elsewhere. So like almost like expanding your consciousness in some sort of ways. Because even if you've just used some of the smaller versions of it, even though you can tell like you're looking at it and it's sort of grainy and things move like slightly different, but you can still have some amazing experiences of like, you know, a dinosaur chasing you, or you're flying high above the skies in a, you know, spaceship or whatnot. But yeah, maybe there's actually some dangers in it as well, in that when you're using that, it does confuse your reality. Like you do question, okay, once you sort of are in it and then you come out of it, you're like, oh, well, what is reality? Because that is actually like a big change. So maybe that's actually an interesting point where at the moment we sort of do have like this, you know, unshakable reality, in that you can't really go into different places, for example, like just by putting on a pair of goggles, and then you're in something that seems exactly the same as, well, like life around us right now. But maybe there's actually some dangers to that, because it could make you lose that grasp of what actually is real and what isn't real.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, this is, I guess, part of the reason why I guess there's dangers associated with like the use of things that alter your states of consciousness, like you know, psychedelics. You know, if you've ever had one of the experiences, you like know that again, it does present you with a completely different lens of what consciousness and reality is, you know. And that's why people, when they describe it, they describe it in a strange way, and they say it's strange, and they say it's weird, and it's very difficult to articulate the experience, because it is something that is very different to what we experience on a day-to-day, but it is to a very quick and powerful and direct, I guess, path to a different state of consciousness. And it shows that there is different layers to this, right? And I'm not sure, like, again, what necessarily it might mean or it might do for people individually. I think it's a different experience for everyone. Again, it's like one of those things that it feels and it guides you through sensation more than anything else that you can articulate or intellectualize. But again, does that mean that isn't reality because it's not what we experience on a day-to-day? I don't know.
Yeah, there's lots of intriguing questions going down. If you get down the what is consciousness path, that leads you to some very strange places, and it's like you said, it's so hard to articulate once you have an experience like that, and almost like comparing the two, even while you're in it, can be like a bit psychologically damaging. When I was in Mexico, they have a very deep culture of using psychedelics with the psilocybin mushrooms, and I was in the mountains there, and just like this amazing setting. I went on a trip, took some mushrooms, went on a trip, and I was just in this like crazy place, just stunningly beautiful. For me, it was very visual, so I would just see lots of like visual things. Didn't feel it so much in the body, but there came a point where I was probably like gradually starting to taper off, and but still experiencing it. And I I was just thinking to myself, like, oh my God, like what if this stays like this? I wouldn't be able to operate normally in the world. Like I wouldn't physically be able to handle, the simple things in life, washing my teeth, cooking, driving a car, things like that. And that actually was like a little bit psychologically painful in a way, because I was going, oh, like, what do I do if I stay like this? Like, I can't stay in this state. So yeah, that's just another analogy to, these things not, those altered states not being for everyone as well. There probably are people who shouldn't meditate. There probably are people who shouldn't try out virtual reality, especially if you're already like, have those mental blocks or mental issues with like schizophrenia. If you're schizophrenic, like, you don't want to be altering your state in basically any sort of way. Like, you're just trying to handle what's here right now, rather than introducing like all these other things as well.
Absolutely, man. Totally. And, I guess this is the reason that, I guess, the psychedelics were banned and made illegal back in the day, in the 50s and the 60s, because although we know that it can have immensely powerful like healing potential, I've used it a couple of times, and I use it on an annual basis, and it has been transformative for me, so I understand it on a personal level. But at the same time, I also know that if you are not prepared for it, then, like you said, it can do more harm than good. And like there's this popularized image of people jumping out windows because they've gone mad from taking MDMA and things like this back in the day, and that's why it was made illegal. But again, there was a lack of real experience, knowledge, and experiment and trial, back then to really understand what and how it should be used, right? So time and place, and again, a level of preparedness. And like, to me, again, it comes down to not what someone tells you is good for you or is going to help you, but whether you're drawn towards it in some way that transcends your intellect, right? Like, I've said this a few times before, like in terms of ayahuasca and wachuma and things like this, you have to feel called to do it, and like, I can't explain it any other way. It's not like you get a phone call from fucking ayahuasca and say, hey, it's your time,
Yeah.
But there's like an intuition, there's a knowing in your body that, like, it sort of trembles between intuitive pull and fear, and you're on this like knife's edge, and you will know for yourself if you feel like you've been drawn towards that type of medicine. And like, it's the same thing with meditation and breath work and anything like this, right? Like, for me, meditation was just one of those things I fell into, but then I learned as I practiced it on a day-to-day basis that I was drawn into it, not so much by the scientific benefits that were, laid out through articles and studies and things like this, but just what it done for me and how I experienced the benefits of it, that I, again, cannot really articulate, but it has brought me to where I am today. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's two things from that. So one was, if people actually ask me about, recommendations of, okay, but how do I know like what my passion is? How do I follow, those interests, what it is that draws me in? What is it that draws me in? I think if you always look back in your past, you can see like little glimmers of things here and there that actually are indicative of what it is that you're interested in. Similar to me with like meditation, I do remember being like 14 and just hearing about these monks who would almost have like be able to alter time. Their perception of time would be so different because they would meditate and then do this walking meditation, a very, very slow walk, which almost, distorted time for them. It was almost like they're in slow motion. And I remember trying this when I was 14, like the worst way of doing it, but it was basically like sitting just in my bedroom at night, not knowing what the hell I was doing. And I gave it up after 20 minutes or something and said, oh, this is, dumb. I'm never doing this again. And then, of course, like 11 years later, I start to get drawn into it. So I think there's always like little instances where you can look back in your own past and see, oh, okay, this was an intriguing to me. This did capture me for whatever reason. Another one for me would be breakdancing. I used to really be fascinated by it. And a couple of my friends did it when I was, like 9 or 10. I never particularly got into it, but I always saw, a guy doing a human flag on a pole and just went, wow, that's the most amazing thing. And then, sure enough, like 12 years later, here I am like doing calisthenics every day. So it's funny just looking back and seeing those little points where, maybe you didn't get into something, but if you look back far enough, you can say, oh yeah, that did intrigue me. The other one was, just related to psychedelics, a little personal story here. I was in Mexico and sort of with a group from the hostel, good friends. And there was this one guy there who in the course of one night mixed caffeine, alcohol, weed, and I think it was probably MDMA or some sort of, like that type of drug. And the next morning he had what I guess could only be called as a mental breakdown. He basically started going crazy, attacking like his really good friend, just screaming out. And, maybe he did have that underlying schizophrenic, genetic pattern in him, but it's also, he was, abusing all these things at the same time, thoughtlessly. And, I'm not that surprised that there was a bad outcome for him from that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an intentionality towards, sitting with these types of medicine that is very specific, and it's very personal. Like I said, like it can't be to achieve some collective dream or some like societally praised goal, because it's not really for that, right? It's about peeling back all that shit back. So if you want to arrive at a state that isn't truly an innate desire, then you will be in for a rude awakening for sure. That's why I talk about the intentionality behind it. It must be really pure and personal for oneself. And like I love how you mentioned looking back to little cues and signs. That in itself is like an intuitive thing in my mind, right? And just picking up on little things that piqued your interest throughout your life. The Matrix is one that it's been huge for me throughout my life. As soon as it came out as a kid, it always figured in my life some way, somehow. Like, it was the prefix of my Hotmail account back in the day. I was Neo. I was Neo in my gaming days. That was my avatar. And I just thought it was cool, right? It was just a cool thing because it was like a radical story that was artistically portrayed in such an aesthetically beautiful way. I love that. But then, it has figured so heavily in my life, even up to this point. And I just look back and there's so many like funny synchronicities that I cannot even explain. That so many things had to happen in order for these things to show up, but they just did. And, again, you can look at it two ways. If you are aware of it, then you can think, hey, this is just hokey shit and, I'm going to ignore it. Or you can honor it and just think about what it means to you. Right? I talk about this all the time in terms of like a really good example that a lot of people should resonate with is when you listen to a song that you really love and it like hits you a different way. It moves through your body and you can't really explain it, right? But it resonates through your body. it hits you like, it hits your soul, it kicks you in the gut. That's telling you something about you. Why does it why does it make you react in that way? Like, it may not be something profound, like, don't get me wrong, but these are the types of, I guess, feelings and movements through your body that we don't get taught how to recognize or be aware of, and we just simply ignore them. But they're so important to, piecing together the whole picture of who we truly are, in my mind.
Yeah, and grabbing onto those and diving deep on them. Yeah, 100% with that. I have the same with certain podcasts I listen to, and I'll notice it because it will capture my attention so deeply that it's almost, I drop whatever else I'm doing, which, I like to combine podcasts with cooking or clean my teeth or stretching or, driving. And there have been times where you come across something and you're just so dialed into it. And I think it's worth, same for me with the book 1984. I read that every single year because I always find something new from it, something really deep and truthful. And you can get that from anywhere, from conversations, from certain locations, from music. And yeah, I think diving, not only having those and being aware of them, but then, actively sort of deconstructing them afterwards to find, okay, what is it about this that hooks me so completely? And I think that's a really important step in doing that.
Totally, man. And I think, I think we could talk forever, but I think also this is a really, really nice thread for us to leave with our audience, just to think about, and, Shaun and I tell this to our audience every week we drop a podcast, is that if there's any gold nuggets, that you pick up that hits you in a certain way, honor that, investigate, be that, be curious about it and see what it means for you. But yeah, man, I think we're going to have you back on, of course, because we can talk forever, and maybe
yeah, I'd love to. I was just looking at the time. I went, oh God, where's it gone?
Yeah, we'll have to get Juan on as well. We might have like a nice four-way. We'll see how that works. But yeah, we'll see if we can set that in motion. But yeah, I'd love to give you the floor, man. Where can people find you, and tell people about your work and what's on the radar right now for you?
Sure. Well, yeah, first of all, just absolutely grateful and appreciative of coming on. And this was such a fun conversation. I really, really enjoyed both of it from you and Leslie, Shaun. As far as us, so we're called Mere Mortals. We have a podcast, Mere Mortals Podcast. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. We also do video as well. So if you type in Mere Mortals Podcast on YouTube, you can find us there. And Instagram is where we're most communicative. So if you look up mere_mortals_media there, that's where you leave any comments. We put small clips and whatnot on there. And I think that's about it from us.
Cool, man. We'll chuck all those links in the show notes for everyone, so it's easy for them to find you.
Perfect.
Cool. And Shaun, where can people find you, bro?
Yeah, easiest place to find me is on Instagram. Just hit me up there. It's Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, Les? Where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on my website, findingspace.co. You can send me an email through there and just say g'day, get in contact about anything that I'm doing over there. I don't know when this podcast will be dropping, but when it drops, I might have my meditation program ready by then. So keep abreast of that, sign up to the newsletter, and if you're interested, drop us a line and I'm happy to have a chat and tell you more about it. Other than that, on my Facebook and Instagram, it's also at findingspace.co. You can also get me through there if you'd like to use those mediums. Also send us an email through our email address, the hustleandflowpodcast@gmail.com. Any questions about this particular episode, if you want to get in touch with the Me Models, or if you want to come on as a guest, feel free to say good day through that channel.
And as always, guys, just a humble request. If you took something from this conversation today, there was a nugget there, something that shifted your perspective, just share it with one other person. That's how we grow the podcast. And we'd love to get these conversations into the ears of other people. And yeah, just want to take a moment again, Kyrin, to just thank you for being here and to acknowledge the, you know, the fact that you're so curious and actually delve down these paths and do it with discipline and commitment as well. It's really commendable. So thanks for being here today and sharing your story with us.
No, my pleasure, man. My pleasure.
So until next time, guys, catch you then.
See you guys.
Yeah.